Well, is America's AI boom about to trigger an electricity crisis? I know some of our state and national leaders have been talking about this, solutions. Let's hear from energy policy analyst at Always On Energy Research. Sarah Montalbano joins us on your 956 drive home. Let's set the stage here on the AI data centers. How much energy do they use, and how is this problem ramping up as quick as it is?
Well, Zach, I think it's a really interesting question because no one really knows how much energy data centers are going to need on the aggregate. I think it's easy to say that, well, one project will draw, 25 megawatts at its top capacity or something like that. But no one really knows how much there's going to be across the United States. And that's really because project developers can submit multiple different places into their interconnection queues. They can ask essentially if a utility has space for their project in multiple different places, and they can find out the favorable terms. So I'm down here in Florida, so I'll use a little bit of an analogy from my neck of the woods. It's like going to Universal Studios, and you can stand in line for one ride, but you can also simultaneously stand in line for a bunch of other rides, and you can even go to Disney World and stand in line for that ride. I think there's a small fraction of the demand that we're expecting is going to probably actually materialize. And I think whenever there's excess capacity for a utility or a grid, that's great. That means they can serve these data centers. But I think no one really knows how much there's going to be. And I think that's part of what's triggered so much of concern in the utilities industry.
I fully admit that a lot of what goes on behind the scenes at data centers is very opaque. It's, it's very enigmatic because, I think the general public has an idea of what a data center does. Oh, it's just there for the AI machine. And the amount of water that it takes in and the amount of electricity that it's supposed to suck up, it's going to vary from place to place. And I'm sure that number is going to be skewed through some sort of funhouse mirror, through social media and whatever the leaders of that particular state or county will have to tell you, the leadership there, whatever municipality. And so it can get very heated very quickly. They're going to do what? They're going to do what to our place? So as far as power generation goes, some places are saying, hey, if you're going to set up shop here with an AI data center, you need to come up with the power generation for that. Would you happen to know how difficult that is to do? Because, they make it sound so easy. Like, hey, but Texas is a state that's been having problems with power generation for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you certainly don't need to tell me that. I think the whole nation was watching Winter Storm Uri in 2021, and that was absolutely a tragedy. And honestly, I think when we talk about bring your own power and consumer regulated electricity, that's a policy idea I'm fond of, both of which you kind of bring your own power behind the grid. I think it's important to note that data center developers, they're tech companies. They're not in the business of being their own utility. I think they will rapidly have to figure that out because that's become a lot of states' preferred solutions to this is to say, look, you're going to have to bring your own power. Another policy idea that's coming out a lot is large load tariffs. So your Public Utilities Commission will, set out rules for certain contract lengths, certain amount of compensation, exit fees if the data center backs out early. And I think a lot of data centers will look at these and say, wow, this is incredibly restrictive, right? Because I think everyone wants to be seen doing something about data centers right now. So I think it's really important for them to have an option to bring your own power or, do consumer regulated electricity where you can bring it yourself and get speed to power too, because the traditional utility planning process takes years to go through, and data centers simply can't afford to wait that long.
Joining us on 710 KURV is Sarah Montalbano, who is an energy policy analyst at Always On Energy Research. We're talking about AI data centers and how much juice they suck up. That brings us to the next question. What would be the most efficient way of powering these AI data centers, especially like you had mentioned and we had mentioned earlier? These guys aren't energy experts. They're not the ones that are in electrical engineering, or if that's the proper major for that. But they're not in the business of power generation. They're in the business of doing the opposite of that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of data centers are going to have to look at their fuel choices, obviously. And I'm not a data center, developer either. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes of this thinking, but I think a lot of them will need 24/7 100%, reliable power. And that's going to mean things like natural gas, and it's going to mean things even potentially like coal if you have excess coal. Another thing that data centers are doing are they're trying to, bring nuclear back online. In Pennsylvania, 3 Mile Island units that have been decommissioned are entering into an agreement to recommission for Google data centers, I believe. So all of those are options that I think are exciting. They are going to have to secure the power somehow if they want to build, and it's going to have to be a reliable source of electricity. And what the benefit is to being connected to a utility means they don't have to think about that, right? So I think many data center developers will prefer that, but they simply won't have the option sometimes. And then they need to bring their own power.
Yeah. I know it's enough that they're buying up the land to build a data center and having to deal with all those resources. They have to build an entire separate space. I get it. It's just one thing after another. But I mean, one of the reasons I think that they had wanted, at least leadership had wanted to have the data centers produce their own energy is so that they don't transfer that extra cost to the consumer. And I'm thinking, this is going to add a larger cost onto the consumer because they're going to tuck that into to whatever price it is that they're using for the AI, I guess. I mean, they're still paying for it, but I mean, how do we know that they're not going to make us foot the bill for the power generation?
That's an interesting question. And I think the honest answer is that utilities can bill ratepayers for anything that gets put on the grid. Like the whole point of this argument that data centers are going to raise rates, the logic goes, well, if a utility needs to build new generation to serve the data centers, it's going to be spread out throughout the rate base, and then potentially residential consumers would be affected, right? In some cases, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think it really depends on how much excess capacity you have on the grid, what the composition of your, wind and solar, the intermittent resources versus your firm resources really ends up being. But when we look at bring your own power, I think it's a pretty clear thing that like when you're insulating ratepayers from that rate base, when the data centers are bringing it by themselves, I don't think that they're going to impact rates at all. Maybe if you're a purchaser of, an AI subscription, maybe that ends up starting to get expensive. But the vast majority of Americans are actually not paying for AI. I pay for AI, but I think most people simply are going to be using free services for quite a while. So I think really it's not going to affect ratepayer rates to have behind the meter generation.
I pay for AI because I was paying for a subscription to Google Photos, and then 1 month to the next, for the storage space, right? 1 month to the next, they said, we're going to double your fee and we're going to throw in Google Gemini with that. And I said, well, I guess that's what we're doing. I guess that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but I have heard it come up recently about the lifespan or the projected lifespan of an AI data center, that we're spending a lot of money into the infrastructure for this new technological development. And if you were to compare it to, say, internet access, like somebody throwing down some cables for internet or something, that has its own lifespan. The roads have their own lifespan and what have you. Would you happen to have an idea of what a data center would look like?
I don't have an estimate for that. No, I think that's an interesting argument, though, because, when we talk about power plants and stuff like that, wind and solar have lifespans between 20 and 25 years. Everything eventually breaks down. Coal and natural gas will last 40 to 60. Nuclear can last 80 plus. So, I think lifespan is maybe a non-unique point about data centers, but I haven't seen any research about it.
Any final thoughts, closing thoughts on AI data centers or the power generation behind them?
I think it's a complicated problem that everyone is wrestling with right now, but I think we have a lot of reasons to be optimistic that things are going to actually turn out okay. We're going to be able to power these things successfully, and they're not going to impact residential rates, I think, in most cases.
Where can we find more information about the research that you all do at Always On Energy?
We are at aoenergy.org. We can also be found on Twitter and Substack. My Substack is Montalbano Mondays. So I'd love if you join me there.
Hey, thanks a lot for your time with us today. We do appreciate it. Sarah Montalbano, Energy Policy Analyst at Always On Energy Research, joining us.